Okay, we're live. Okay, let me start. Welcome everyone, and so I mentioned that it is now after Pesach, and as such, it would be appropriate to discuss the next period of the Jewish calendar that follows Pesach, and that is the counting of the Omer. So on Pesach, we went out of Egypt. We celebrated the great exodus from Egypt, which was a collective, communal exodus and liberation. And we tried, of course, during the Seder, and it's set up that way, that we should try our best to experience it as a personal exodus as well. But truth be told, Pesach is more about a revelation from above. The work is done by God. We're just recipients of this incredible revelation that took place. Let me explain. When the Jews were in Egypt, as we all know, they were they were steeped in very negative Egyptian behavior. We're told that they even worshipped the idols of Egypt, many of them. And it says that they were very not spiritual, to say the least. And we're told that a God had no choice but to get them out of Egypt at the last moment, because had he not taken them out at the moment that he did, they would never be able to be redeemed from Egypt. This is what our sages tell us. Why? Because their souls would have become corrupt to the point where there's no redemption, where it's too late. So what happens? God reveals a certain part of himself, as we say in the Haggadah, Nigla Aleim Melech Malchei Hamlochem HaKadosh Baruch Hu U'Ge'olam. God revealed himself, the King and the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed himself and redeemed the Jewish people. In other words, there was this overwhelming spiritual revelation that was shining at them in Egypt, that's just scooped them out, that drew them towards God, but it wasn't their own doing. It was like a magnet, a spiritual magnet that overwhelmed them. And they just got sucked into the spiritual moment, and they were taken out of Egypt in a quick exodus. But then our sages tell us that that's not the ultimate goal, of course. Because what God really wants is that we should go out of exile on our own terms, not that He should do the work for us. He's going to reveal some great revelation that's going to be magnetic to our souls, and we're going to just get sucked into it. But our very self remains in Egypt. As they said, the old saying goes, you can take the Jew out of Egypt, but you can't take the Egypt out of the Jew, or the Brooklyn out of the Jew, right? Whatever nusach you want to apply to that. But that's the truth. And therefore, it's not enough what happened in Egypt. And Egypt was great. It was a good booster. It was a good flash of great spiritual joy, which really took us out. It got us out of the mess that we were in, but it didn't change us. It did not transform us. It didn't really affect us in any meaningful way on long term, so to say. For that, we have what the Jewish people did it then, and we do it now. And that is called the counting of the 49 days. The Jewish people Moses told them that they asked him where we're going when they left Egypt, and Moshe told them they are going to Mount Sinai, because God is going to show himself to the Jewish people and forge and enter into a relationship that's going to be an eternal, everlasting covenant with the Jewish people was going to take place at Sinai. When is this going to happen, they asked? Well, this is going to happen in 50 days from now, he said to them. And that is when the Jewish people began counting 49 days. In great anticipation for this tremendous moment, they will stand at Mount Sinai and become one with Hashem, quite literally. Ever since and then came, of course, the revelation at Sinai and the giving of the Torah, where the Jewish people forged a relationship, an everlasting relationship with God that can never change, basically. This is why we have the mitzvah today to count the Omer. You've ever heard of the counting of the Omer? I'm sure you all heard of that mitzvah. We do it every night for 49 days from the second day of Pesach. Now, do you know how to count the Omer? Anyone does it? Or you heard of it, but do you actually do it? So if you do, you will know that it's interesting that we count the days and we count the weeks. So let me quote to you. It's in your source sheet. You see it? It's a quote from the Talmud Menachot, Tractate Menachot, 66a. Abaye said, I don't have it in front of me, I have the Hebrew, so if I don't translate it exactly, you forgive me. I'm not reading it out of that source sheet itself. Abaye said, it is a mitzvah to count the days, and it is a mitzvah to count the weeks. The rabbis, the sages say, it is a mitzvah to count the days. The rabbis actually counted the days and the weeks. They actually did that. Omer counted days, but he didn't count weeks. Because he said, today we do the mitzvah of counting of the Omer only as a commemoration, as a memory to what we did in temple times. But it's not really a mitzvah today to do it anymore. Okay, let me explain what I just read. When you read it, if you ever counted the Omer, what we say is, let's say, last night was which count? Last night happened to be the 12th night. I won't say what tonight is. You know why? Because I didn't do it yet. And if I say to you now what night tonight's count is, boom, I did it, and I therefore later when I want to do it with a blessing, I won't be able to do it anymore because I already did it. So I'm not going to say what's tonight. It's customary when someone asks you what's tonight, you don't say what tonight is. You say last night was 12. And you can figure out what tonight is. Okay. So last night was 12. So how did we do it? We made the blessing. And then we said, Hayom Shneim Osar Yom. Today is the 12th night. Shehem Shavua Echad, which is 1 week. V'chamisha Yomim LaOmer. And 5 days of the Omer. That's what 12 is. 12 is 7, a week and 5 days. Okay. So we say we count the days. According to Abaye, we're supposed to count the days and the weeks. So for example, when the 7th day comes or the 14th day comes, we don't just say today is the 14 days of the Omer. We say today is 14 days, which is 2 weeks of the Omer. So we count days and we count weeks. Got that? So that's what Abaye says. It's a mitzvah to count the days, and it is also a mitzvah to count the weeks. And that's how the sages actually did it in certain places. But Omer, he has a different opinion. And he says today's days, you only have to count days, but not weeks. Because today it's no longer a biblical mitzvah to count the Omer. I'll explain in a minute why. According to his opinion, it's not a mitzvah today biblically to count the Omer. And therefore, it's only a commemoration. We do a lot of things to remember temple times. On the Seder plate, we have a shank bone. Why? We eat afikomen. Why? To remember the Pesach offering. It's not a mitzvah to bring a Pesach offering now. It's actually a sin to bring a Pesach offering if there's no temple. So we don't have that mitzvah anymore. But we do certain things to remind ourselves of how it was in temple times. This way, we keep the memory of the temple alive in our mind all the time. That's why we read about the sacrifices every morning and so on. So therefore, being according to this, he says it's not a biblical mitzvah to count the Omer anymore, any day, any time, today's days. And that's what Rashi explains. I have Rashi in your sheet as well. Rashi explains that Omer counted the days and not the weeks because he said that the count today is not a biblical obligation because we don't have the Omer offering. Hold that thought, I'll explain. And therefore it's only to remember how it was during temple times, and therefore, to remember memory, it's enough to count the days. You don't have to mention that it's also 2 weeks. 14 is 14 days. Everyone can figure out that 14 is 2 weeks. So that's his opinion. And is that clear to everyone? So let me now give you the history of this, what's going on over here. Why do we have these opinions? Why was it biblical then? Today it's not biblical. Why? What does the temple have to do with this? You're counting days after Pesach to get us to Shavuos. What does the temple have to do with this? Why is no temple mean, according to this opinion, that there's no mitzvah? And it's only rabbinic. So let's go back to the biblical text. Let's see what the Bible says about this. This is out of Leviticus 23, verses 15 and 16. Okay? It says over there, from the day following the first day of Pesach, the day you bring the Omer as a wave offering, you should count for yourself 7 weeks. When you count them, they should be perfect, full weeks. You should count up until, but not including, the 50 days. In other words, you do 49 days. And the day following the 7th week, on the 50th day, you should bring the first meal offering from the new crop to God. Basically what it says over here is, so let me explain to you what went on. On the second day of Pesach, there was a mitzvah in the Torah to bring a Pesach, a Omer offering. What is an Omer offering? It is a offering that is a meal offering. It's a flour. But what kind of flour was it? It was flour from barley flour. It was brought from barley, and they would have to bring an omer of the barley. Omer is a certain measurement of barley. The exact measurement of an omer is 43 and a fifth of an egg. 43 eggs and a fifth. It's the exact measurement of an omer. And they would mix that barley with oil and things and so on. And then the Kohen would take his 3 fingers, and he would take a fistful. He would take his 3 fingers, take a fistful of this flour, of this barley flour. And that fistful he would put on the altar, and that would burn on the altar. From the rest of this measure, omer, of barley grain or flour, he would go and they would bake it into matzahs, and they would eat it. The Kohanim would eat it. And that was done on the second day of Pesach, the day after the first day of Pesach. And this was brought as an Omer offering. This Omer offering was brought from the new crop. From the new crop. And the law was, by the way, that you weren't allowed, no Jew was allowed to eat or benefit from the new crop that grew in Israel until they brought the Omer offering. So, for example, from the new season, they would all want to harvest their fields, so they were not allowed to use the new crop before the Omer offering was brought in the temple. Once the Omer was brought, which was on the morning of the 16th of Nisan, which is the second day of Pesach, now any Jew can utilize and benefit from the new crop. By the way, if you ever buy kosher items, kosher baked goods in a kosher store, you may have seen on it that it says that the flour was from Yoshon flour. Did you ever see that on baked goods? Yoshon flour. What does Yoshon mean? Yoshon means that it's old. It's not from the new crop. In other words, you can eat it whenever you want. Because from the new crop that grew from the new season, you have to wait for the 16th of Nisan to benefit from it. And you may buy it on the 8th of Nisan. So you don't have to wait 8 days till you eat it. Or you may buy it in March or in February. You have to wait till Pesach. So this is from Yoshon, from old crop. It's not from the new season. And this way you're safe. You can eat it whenever you want. Then that's connected to the Omer offering. Fine. So the mitzvah is that after you bring the Omer offering, you start counting 49 days. Let's read this verse again, now that you have some context. We'll read this text again. From the day following the first rest day of Pesach, the day you bring the Omer as a wave offering, you should count for yourself 7 weeks. That's the words of the Torah. Count 7 weeks. 49 days. But it doesn't say here's 49 days. It says 7 weeks first. When you count them, they should be perfect. Full weeks, not 6.5 weeks or so. You should count up until, but not including 50 days. In other words, 49 days. In other words, the day following the 7th week, up until the 50th day, which follows the 7th week. Well, that is Shavuos. And then, on the 50th day, you bring the first meal offering from the new crop to God. Now, let's read the next text. And this is out of Deuteronomy 16, verses 9 and 10. Over there it reads as follows. You shall count 7 weeks for yourself. Again, 7 weeks, right? From the time the sickle is first put to the standing crop, you shall begin to count 7 weeks. In other words, when you start with the new crop, the sickle to the crop, when you start, when you harvest, you should begin to count 7 weeks. And that's the day that we start counting, because that's when we brought the first from the first crop. And you shall perform the festival of weeks to the Lord, your God. This is Shavuos, of course. The festival of weeks is Shavuos. So you shall then perform the festival of weeks to the Lord, your God. The donation you can afford to give. You should bring gifts to the temple according to how the Lord your God shall bless you. Okay. So we have over here in the first text, it says you should count 7 weeks. And then it says you should count 50 days. So therefore, since in the verse it says you should count weeks, and it also says you should count days, so therefore Abaye says it's a mitzvah to count days and to count weeks, because the Torah says clearly you should count both. Clear? Very good. Now, it's interesting to note, and I'll just give you a little more technical stuff before we get into the more spiritual, psychological aspect of all of this, that according to Maimonides, Rambam, even today it is a mitzvah to count the Omer biblically, to count weeks, to count days. It's a biblical mitzvah. He doesn't concur with the idea that only when there was an Omer offering in the temple was it a biblical mitzvah. And today, because we don't have the Omer, it's not a biblical mitzvah. In other words, those opinions that say that today it's not a biblical mitzvah, the reason they say that is because in the verses that I just read, he connects the bringing of the counting of the Omer with the bringing of the Omer offering, right? And therefore they see that juxtaposition, that connection, as when you can bring the Omer offering, it's a mitzvah, and when you can, it is not a mitzvah. That's why they have of the opinion that it's not a mitzvah to count these days when there's no temple, and it's only a rabbinic mitzvah. Rambam is of a different opinion. He holds that it is a mitzvah today, even today, when there's no Omer offering, to bring to count, because he separates the two things. There's a mitzvah to bring an Omer offering, and that was just a sign when to start counting the Omer, but it's not connected to it. It's not tied to it. If there's no Omer, you count anyway. Other opinions are that it is only a rabbinic mitzvah. For example, the Code of Jewish Law, Rabbi Yosef Cairo, is of the opinion that it is not a biblical mitzvah today. It's only a rabbinic mitzvah today. And according to Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, who wrote and updated the Code of Jewish Law in the 17th and the 18th century, he's also of the opinion that it is not a biblical mitzvah to count the Omer today. It is only he mentions that today there are opinions that says that it's only rabbinic. Okay. So you have two opinions already, right? Which are the two opinions? One says that it's a biblical mitzvah even today. Another opinion is that of Ameimar, that it is not a biblical mitzvah today. It's only a rabbinic mitzvah, and therefore you count days, not weeks. It's enough as a remembrance, as a memory for the temple. It's enough to say today's 14 days. You don't have to say which is 2 weeks. But then there's a third opinion, and that's the third opinion that I want to discuss tonight at length. The third opinion is that of Rabbeinu Yerucham. He was a great sage in the 12th century, I believe, or the 13th century. And he says as follows. And for this you have to follow the source sheet. I want to point this out. If you take a look in Deuteronomy again, I'm going to read it to you. He points out an interesting nuance. And he says as follows. It says in Deuteronomy, you shall count 7 weeks for yourself from the time in the first text from Leviticus. Again, we're going to read both. From the day following the rest day of Pesach, and the first day of Pesach, the day you bring the Omer offering, you shall count for yourself 7 weeks. Okay? Again, look at Deuteronomy now. It says over there, you shall count, and I quote, you shall count 7 weeks for yourself from the time the sickle is put to the standing crop, which is the bringing of the Omer offering. You shall begin to count 7 weeks. So he says like this. His opinion is, first let me tell you his opinion, then I'll tell you why. His opinion is that today, even today, it is a biblical mitzvah to count days. The days is still biblical. But to count weeks, that's rabbinic. So he's like somewhere in between both opinion. One opinion says it's all biblical. Another opinion says today it's all rabbinic. He says no, half is biblical and half is rabbinic. To count days is biblical. To count weeks is rabbinic. Why does he say that? Because I just read, any time there's a reference to the counting of the Omer weeks, to counting weeks, it mentions it's juxtaposed to the Omer offering. In other words, there's a connection between counting the weeks and the Omer offering. So when there's no Omer offering, you don't have to count weeks. But where the Torah says to count the 50 days, it doesn't mention anything about the Omer offering. And therefore he says that's not connected to the Omer offering, and therefore even when there's no Omer offering, you still have to count the days. This is Talmudic, you got to get used to that kind of back and forth. But you get it, right? You understand what I just said? He's learned from the verse. He says, and the verse is very nuanced. Where it says you should count weeks, that's where it mentions the Omer offering. There's a connection. So if there's no Omer, there's no counting weeks biblically. But where it says to count 50 days, it doesn't mention the Omer offering, and therefore he says that's not written. That's independent, and therefore even today that is a biblical mitzvah. So he says, therefore, you should count the days biblically, but the rabbis added that you should still count the weeks also, because they wanted us to remember exactly the way it was done in temple times. Very good. That's Rabbeinu Yerucham's opinion. Any questions? Huh? Okay, let me move on. Here's a number. You don't have questions, so I'll ask you a few questions. What in the world is going on over here? What is this mitzvah all about? Count days, count weeks. You should count the days, but not the weeks. You should count the weeks, but not the days, biblically, rabbinically. What is this idea of counting, first of all? What are we counting over here? Days, counting days. And also, even if you want to count in anticipation for the coming of the holiday of Shavuos and the giving of the Omer, Very well, I can appreciate that. But why do you have to count? For example, yesterday we said today was 12 days. Not enough. That's not enough, right? Today is 12 days. Tomorrow is going to be 13 days. After tomorrow is going to be 14 days. What do you have to go and now translate? What is 12 days? Just in case you don't know what 12 days is. So we have to say 12 days, which are 1 week and 5 days. We're all adults. We all went to school. We know a little math, even if we don't know sophisticated math. But to add up what 12 is, that it's 7 plus 5, and therefore it's a week and 5 days, most people, even children, can do that. Why does the Torah have to tell me, no, it's not enough to just say you should count 12 days. You should say today is 12 days, which is 1 week and 5 days of the Omer. Why do we have to count? What's going on over here? And what is this opinion of Rabbeinu Yerucham? We do count the days, but not the weeks. Let's try to make some sense of all of this. And what's this whole idea of counting? Jews count. What are we counting days for? So let me just put on the air conditioning and I'll be right back. Sorry about that. Okay. So let me introduce you to a very famous Hasidic and Kabbalistic concept that discusses the soul of the human being, the soul of all of us. We all know that we are made up, in the words in the teachings of Kabbalah and Hasidism, we're told that the human soul, the human heart, is made up of 7 emotional attributes. 7 midot, 7 attributes. I'm going to enumerate the 7 attributes. I'll loosely translate them. I'm not going to discuss them all tonight, of course, because it's not the subject of tonight's class, the specifics of these attributes, but they will be mentioned where they have to be mentioned. The 7 are Chesed, which can say love. Gevura is the second one, which would be strength, restraint, discipline, boundaries. The third one is Tiferes. In other words, the ability. The second one is discipline, restraint, strength. Yeah, that takes strength. The third one is Tiferes, which means harmony, beauty, empathy. Now, all these are connected, and one day we'll get into that. The fourth one is Netzach, which means victory, Nitzachon, right? Victory or ambition. The fifth one is Hod, which would be humility, the ability to submit, surrender to others, gratitude, the ability to admit you made a mistake. That's Hod. The sixth one is Yesod, which is bonding, communicative talents. And the seventh, Malchus, is leadership, kingship, confidence, and so on. That's basically the 7 human emotional attributes which each one of us, every human soul, every Jewish soul, is made up of these 7 attributes. And what we're really trying to do in the counting of the Omer is the 7 weeks is intended to take and to work each week on another one of these 7 emotional attributes and perfect them, align them. They should be aligned with the 7 holy, godly emotional attributes, which are also the same 7. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. You have it in the davening every morning. We say, L'cha Hashem Hagdula v'Hagvura v'Tiferes v'Hanetzach v'Hahod. We mention he also has these 7 emotional holy attributes, and we are in his image, and therefore we have those same 7 emotional attributes. Our soul is made up of those 7 emotional attributes because we're in his mirror image of Hashem. And the idea behind the 7-week count is to perfect and make sure that our love, our restraint, our discipline, our empathy, our ambition and victory is aligned and in sync with God's chesed, gvura, tiferes, and so on and so forth. So every week, we have to make sure to work over another one of these attributes. Let me get into it a little more specific. So, for example, the first week is love. First week is chesed. So we have to now, everyone has love. But everyone has the potential for love, right? It's ingrained within our soul. That is the very anatomy, that is the DNA of our soul. But we have, do you know how to love? Do you know how to direct your love properly? Not necessarily. Not everyone is able to do that. Not everyone knows how to receive love. So it's not so simple. So you have to work out that your love should be the proper love. Shouldn't love the wrong person. For example, the second week, which we're in now, is Gevura, is the week of judgment, the week of strength, as I translated it before, the week of discipline and restraint, boundaries, yeah? This is all Gevura. Do I know how to respect boundaries? Do I know how to discipline? Am I too harsh? Am I too weak? And so on. Do I have the proper balance and discipline and so on? So it's very important. And the same thing with hate. You know, Gvura would also, if chesed is love, Gvura would also be a little bit connected to hate. Should we hate? Well, it depends. We should hate bad things. We should hate evil. We should never hate another person. But evil we should hate, and so on. So you have to channel your hate and your love and all these emotional feelings and attributes in the proper way. The third week would be tiferes, the ability to have empathy, to be there for someone else on their terms, not on your own, to completely be there for someone else. The fourth week is, again, I mentioned netzach, the idea of your ambitions. To overcome, and victory, to overcome adversity. A person should be able to be victorious, to overcome difficult challenges. Victory means to overcome adversity and so on and so forth. The fifth week is the ability to give gratitude, humility, the ability to admit you made a mistake, and so on and so forth. So every one of these weeks is meant to fix one of these emotional attributes, and that brings personal redemption. You remember I started that on Pesach, God took us out collectively in one quick sweep. He swept us out. It was a magnet that schlepped us out, but we didn't change. Now we have to now we have to step in and do the work ourselves. Now it is our job in these 7 weeks to experience personal exodus, to really redeem our soul. When is your soul properly redeemed and free? When it is only aligned with God, when it is properly channeled, when the emotional attributes of your soul are properly expressed in the proper way. And the same thing with the 6th week is the ability to connect with others, and the 7th week is the ability to be a leader, to be a king, to be leadership, confidence. Okay, so those are the 7 weeks. And we're told to count the 7 weeks. What's the count? By the way, what is Sfirat HaOmer? In Hebrew, it's Sfirat HaOmer, right? The word Sfirat can mean count, but it also can mean, from the same meaning of the word Even Sapir. Sfira is from the same word as Sapir, which means a brilliance. It's a brilliant stone. It means to light up, to shine, to make, in other words, Sfirat HaOmer is that it's not only to count, but it's to make our emotions brilliant, shine. They should be lit up in the proper way. They should basically be aligned with Hashem. Healthy emotions, and so on and so forth. So that's the counting of the weeks. But here comes an interesting thing. It is also a mitzvah to count days. It's not just a mitzvah. The Torah says you should count 7 weeks, but it also says you should count 49 days. And that's why we say today is 12 days, which is 1 week and 5 days. It's a mitzvah to count weeks, and it's also a mitzvah to count days. What is this counting of days? So our sages of Kabbalah take this apart even more, and they say as follows, that every one of these 7 emotional attributes is subdivided into 7. So for example, the emotional attribute of love, kindness, there are that one emotion is subdivided into 7. There's love within love. There's discipline within love. There is empathy within love. There's netzach within love, and so on. Each one has all 7. Now, obviously, I can't go into all the 49 different aspects of the soul, but I will give you a few examples just to you understand it. So, for example, let's say the first week is love. A father loves his child. A mother loves her child. There's 2 ways to express that love. For example, how does that love manifest itself? When you see a mother waking up her kids in the morning and forcing them to go to school and forcing them to eat breakfast, and she may even sometimes have to raise her voice at them and tell them that if you don't, you're going to get punished. And the kid was being silly and she didn't, or he didn't, and he didn't go to school and do well, and she got punished. The mother punished him. Is that an expression of love? Well, you can argue, no, that's discipline. That's judgment. That's discipline. But my friends, that is discipline within love. Sometimes there's love within love, which is the mother giving her child a piece of chocolate because the child wants a piece of chocolate. So the mother is loving his child through an act of love, of kindness. Sometimes the mother is loving her child, but the love is manifesting itself in a gevura manifestation, a disciplinary manifestation. And the same thing with the other way around. So in other words, what's the basis of this behavior? It's love. What's the detail of this behavior? The underlying emotion is love. The manifestation, how does it manifest itself? Through discipline. That's very normal. And you could have the other way around also. I hate you. Yeah, let's say I hate a person. I dislike someone very much. So what do you do with people that you dislike? You don't want them in your life. You reject them. That's gvura, rejection. Boundaries. I want to be here. I want you to be there. I want to have anything to do with you. But sometimes I really want to get that person. I want to really destroy that person. So I trick him. I smile at him. And they say he smiled at me, but then he stabbed me behind the back, right? Yeah, everyone knows that concept, right? That smile was love, was kindness. You can argue, wow, he's smiling at him. He's so kind to him. I wasn't kind at all. That smile was the manifestation of a real hateful person. So the underlying emotion was judgment, severity, discipline. You can even go further, a harsh word, hate. But what was the manifest? How did that underlying emotion manifest itself? Through an act of kindness. He smiled at him. He even gave him something. He invited him to his conference, Yasser Arafat. Smiled at us, and I love you, we're peace, it's all great, right? But we know what his real intentions were. He was not a loving person at all. He didn't love the Jewish people, he didn't love Israel. So you have that smile, which is really, it looks nice, it sounds very kind, and he's being very lovable and very exciting around us and so on. But the underlying emotion is anything but love. It's discipline. It's severity. It's very negative. Got that, right? So you get with, and each one has all 7. So that's the 49. So let me explain it like this. When the Torah says, I want you to count weeks, what the Torah is saying, I want you to work this week on the underlying emotion itself. Your love is messed up. Your discipline, your strength is not prized. Or, for example, a person has temptations, negative, bad temptations, bad addictions. You're drawn to. You're drawn to very negative desires. You have bad desires. So when a person is drawn to something, that is chesed, that's more love. What is love? There's an attraction to something. I'm loving something. Well, your love is in big trouble. If you're attracted to the wrong people, to the wrong substances, and so on and so forth, we got a big problem. So the Torah says, "V'sfartem lechem shiva shavuos." You should count 7 weeks. What the Torah is telling us over here is, first of all, there's a mitzvah to count weeks. The Torah wants us to work on the underlying emotion of every person. Your 7 emotions. Every week another emotion. But then there's a mitzvah to count days. 50 days, 49 days. What's the days? The Torah doesn't just want us to work on the underlying emotion. But the Torah also wants us to work on how that emotion, once you even have that right, how is it going to manifest itself? How is it going to be applied in real life? So there's 2 things we have to work on to bring about real redemption, personal redemption. What is redemption? Freedom. Where you're completely free to express your deepest essence. Right? So the Torah tells us there's 2 things I need you to do after Pesach. Count weeks and count days. Meaning, every week you are to work on an underlying emotion, to align that properly. It shouldn't be the wrong emotion. It shouldn't be misplaced emotion. And then count days. Every week count 7. Today is 1 week and 5 days. And that means you worked on the 5th aspect, the 5th detail of the underlying emotion of chesed or gvura, whatever week you're in. So that you're perfecting one step after the other. Not just the underlying basis, the essence of the midah, of the emotion, but the manifestation, how it expresses itself as well. Clear? You know, sometimes, let me try to explain this so that you can appreciate this a little more. You know, sometimes you hear from people that they feel that they had an enlightening. They had an epiphany. They went to a seminar and they were there for a weekend and they came back completely transformed. There was a moment that changed their life. You ever heard that from people? Yeah? Someone opened them up to a new concept, a new idea. He changed him completely. Came out, he's a new human being. You know the story they tell about the Chelm, the someone from Chelm. You know Chelm? You ever heard of Chelm? That's the city. For some reason, they lucked out badly, and they say that Chelm had smart people, but they make the jokes of the Chelm people. The jokes are that they're not smart. So there's this Chelm, a father and a son were walking into a hotel, and they see suddenly, they were never in a modern hotel, and they see suddenly 2 silver walls and someone comes over on the side of the wall, presses a button, and the two walls open up. And a minute later, they press the button, it closes. And the son, they never saw such a thing. The son looks up to the father, you ever saw this? What is this? Never saw such a thing before. They stand, they're mesmerized by this thing. And the son-in-law, suddenly, someone presses the button, it opens up, and an old lady walks in. An old lady is wheeled in with a wheelchair. Okay, the door's closed and she disappears. A minute and a half later, they're waiting there to see, what's going to happen. The doors open up, and a young 25-year-old, beautiful-looking young woman comes out. The father goes nuts. He can't believe what's going on. He says to his son, "Go quickly, bring mom. Let's get her over here quickly." Mm-hmm. But that's the story of many people's life sometimes. They think you can go into an elevator, close the door for a minute, and you come out a new person. You go to a seminar for a weekend, I'm a new person. You know what the problem is? When this happened, when people, feel that they suddenly changed, it can express itself in, you had a negative trait to be completely lazy, procrastinator, a lazy person. Or a person had an addiction to cigarettes, whatever it may be. And suddenly he's a new person. He feels motivated, he's not procrastinating, he feels like he's on fire. He's got new energy. He's a new person. He walked out of the elevator, a 24-year-old young woman. It's a new person. But then comes the terrible disappointment. What happens? These people think that it's very, that this is very common that people make this transformation and become new people all of a sudden. They change and they're totally transformed. And they try themselves. Sometimes it does happen. I'm not going to say it never happens. Sometimes a person can experience there are moments in a person's life that is life-altering, life-changing. It does happen, but they're far and few in between. For most people, they have this tremendous charge of energy, so to say. They feel like like I said, they had this epiphany, they've heard a new idea, they feel like they've transformed themselves. But 2 weeks later, the skeletons start coming out of the closet again. The same ugly temptation starts rearing its ugly head. You feel like, oh boy, I'm the same person I was 2 weeks ago. I'm the same old lady in the wheelchair. So what do? It isn't easy to change and to really transform the weak. The 7 weeks, the underlying emotion remains the same. You've the same temptations, the same addictions, the same negative, the same stories, the same skeletons, the same problems. So the Torah says, my friend, there's good news. There's a mitzvah to count days. If you cannot accomplish to transform and to really change the underlying weekly emotion, the essence, the essential emotion of the person, you could change, you can count days. What does it mean to count days? It means like this. I heard an interesting parable that I'd like to share with you. Imagine you're driving a car and you're late, and you're in a rush to somewhere, and you're driving a car, and you came to a red light. It's a big intersection, so it's 2-3 minute light, like Weston Road and Royal Palm Boulevard. Yeah. And in back seat you have, someone screaming at you. Get going, past the red light, skip the light. There's no one looking. Go. We're going to miss the funeral. We're going to be late for the pictures. We're going to be late for the chuppah. We're going to be late for the wedding. We're late for the bar mitzvah, whatever it may be. And he's screaming. He's not just suggesting. He's saying, go, get going already. Is that voice that's coming from the back seat forcing you to drive recklessly? Of course not. It's not your voice. It's not the truth. That voice that's coming from the back seat is not it doesn't represent the truth. It's a foreign voice that's trying its hardest to influence and affect what you do right now, to drive not responsibly. So how hard is it for you to drive responsibly when that happens? Hey, it's a nagging voice. You'd like him to shut up already, but he's not shutting up, so he's screaming at you. But who has the ultimate choice? Who's at the wheel? Who has the steering wheel? You have the steering wheel. You can make the choice right now to listen to that voice or not to listen to that voice. But there's one condition. You have to recognize that that voice is not you. It's a foreign voice. And then you can take control. If you believe that that is you, then that's going to control you. If you believe that it's a foreign voice that's coming from behind, is hacking you, nagging you, you have the will, you can make the choice. So I gave you an example of a voice that's truly coming from outside. But sometimes in life, in our own human psyche, these voices come from it's a voice that's not coming from the backseat driver. It's a voice that I'm hearing within myself that's telling me, go get that thing that you know right now that's to fulfill your temptation. You know right now that's a terrible temptation to fulfill. It's going to drive you off the deep end. It's going to be a wrong thing for you to do. But it's a voice that's telling you from inside, go do it. Right? So let me share with you how the Alter Rebbe in Tanya applies this. How he puts it into the way he puts the words that he uses for this. He says like this. You have emotions. I want you to listen carefully to this because this is crucial to understanding this. You have emotions. Yeah, your underlying emotions. You have temptations. You have a desire. You have addiction. Whatever those emotions are. What happens when you have to express that emotion? How does that emotion manifest itself? Like for example, someone gets you angry. Doesn't stop getting you angry. How does anger manifest itself? It manifests itself in a thought. I am now thinking about my emotional anger. Every emotion dresses up in thoughts, in words, or in actions. I want you to pay attention and understand this. I have anger in myself, right? Anger would be the second weak, gevura. It's bad. It's a bad thing. It's a negative thing. It's judgmental. It's not good. But I'm angry. I have that inside me. How do you manifest that anger? You're angry at your spouse. You think, what a nudnik she is. Let me give you an example. Your wife texts you every single day, what time are you coming home today? Text you. What time are you coming home? Question mark. Every single day, the same text. And you can leave me alone already, right? So you get angry. So you're angry at her. How do you manifest that anger? You think, Does she not understand that I'm working to provide for the family? What kind of a nudnik is she? Why is she doing it? It manifests itself in thoughts. Those thoughts, says the Alter Rebbe, are garments. Those are it's like a garment, like a shirt, like a jacket, like a coat. Garments you can take off when you don't want to wear them. You know what happens when you go to the mirror and in the morning you want to look at yourself and you say, oh my God, this garment is ripped and this garment is filthy. You're stuck with it? You have to go and wear it for the rest of the day? No. You go back into the restroom, to your washroom, to your dress room, you take it off and you put something else on. A garment you can remove. Thoughts you can choose. That thought, it's the same thing. That person is knocking you from the back seat. Go, skip the red light. Sometimes that voice comes from another person. Sometimes that thought comes from within you. From a reckless emotion. But the thought you have control. Are you going to put that thought, allow that thought into your mind and manifest itself or not? That is a garment that you can choose to put on or to take off. Maybe the underlying emotion, the underlying temptation, the underlying anger in this case is something you may not have control over right now. It takes much, much more effort and spiritual attainment and work to transform an emotion where I no longer am angry. But let's even say you can't count the weeks. You can't deal with the underlying emotion. But you could deal with the way that emotion manifests itself in your mind, in your heart. Are you going to scream at your wife when she comes home, when you come home, because she got you angry? Are you going to choose to think negatively about your spouse? Or you can translate that in a very different way. Maybe she wants to be with me. Maybe she misses me. That's why she sends me these texts. You have the choice how you're going to steer that wheel. You may not have the choice of the underlying emotion, but you do have a choice how to manifest that emotion. What garments you're going to allow, what garments you're going to dress that emotion with. Which thoughts, which words, and which actions. Those are garments you can take them off and on at leisure. You have full control of that. And that's the mitzvah to count days. That's the mitzvah to count days. I'll tell you a story. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing to control the way you think, the way you speak, and the way you act. You know, there's a story about Shem Tov. They tell the story. It's a great story. Baal Shem Tov was once teaching his students in the shul, and outside there was a Ukraine. This was in the city of Mezhebush in Ukraine, and outside was a wagon driver. His horse got stuck. It was the middle of the winter, and there was a lot of mud, and then there was butts, and the horse fell into the mud, and he couldn't get it out, and he can't move. He needed help. He needed 5-10 guys to help him schlep the horse out of the deep mud. So he went into right there was the synagogue of the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov is in the middle of talking and lecturing to his students. And he sticks his head into the window. He didn't go in because he didn't. He sticks his head into the window. He says in Russian, I need help. I need 5 guys to help me with my horse. My horse is stuck in the mud. Could you please come out and help me? So the Hasidim said, we can't. In Russian, they said, we can't. Nemozhish, they said in Russian. Who knows Russian here? They said to them, Nemozhish, we can't. So this peasant screams back at them, Mozhish, ty nie хочешь. You can, but you just don't want. You don't want, you can. The Baal Shem Tov heard this, and he said to the students, my lesson is finished. That was tonight's lesson. He learned from this peasant something deep and profound. You say, I can't. What do you mean, I can't? You don't want to. You could, but you don't want to. How hard is it to take off your shirt and put on another shirt? So it's easier to put on a physical shirt as it is much easier to change your thought than to change your shirt. Much harder to change a thought. But it is, when you think about it. A thought you can control. I'm not letting this thought into my head right now. If it enters, I'm going to remove it. I'm going to change my thoughts right now. In other words, the question is, the weekly sphera, the weekly attribute, you may not be able to count so easily and transform so easily, but you do have full control full control on the manifestation of that emotion. And this is why now we come back to the opinions about the counting of the Omer. Let's bring it full circle now. You remember we talked about Rabbeinu Yerucham. He is somewhere in the middle of the road, right? Rambam says, today's days, it's a mitzvah biblically to count both weeks and days. Others say that it's not a mitzvah to count not weeks and not days, because we don't have the Omer. Rabbeinu Yerucham says, biblically, you don't have to count weeks, but you do have to count days on the biblical level. But the rabbis added that you should even count weeks today as well. What is the spiritual, psychological dynamic going on over here with these sages? They're arguing about minutiae, you think, right? Not really. What he's saying is, in the times of the temple, and listen to this, in temple times, God was manifest among the Jewish people. He was revealed. People saw miracles. The temple was a place where you walked in there and you observed 10 miracles every day. The Mishnah says that. There were 10 miracles that took place in the temple every single day. You wanted to see God, you went to Jerusalem, you went into the temple, you saw God. God was revealed among the Jewish people. When there's such a closeness between God and the Jewish people and the world and us, then it is much more feasible and much more available for us to align ourselves completely from inside and out with Hashem. So therefore, in temple times, the biblical mitzvah is to count not only days, but to count weeks also. The Torah expects us to fully align ourselves with Hashem, because there's no reason you could do it. It's not so out of reach. God is much closer to the world, much closer to the person, and you're able to align yourself. So therefore, there's a mitzvah. Not easy, but possible. But then the destruction of the temple happened. And what then? God is a little bit more removed in the sense of how, in his manifestation, we don't see him as much. Of course, he's not removed, he's here, but we don't see him. He concealed himself. And therefore, it's much more difficult for a person to completely align himself completely and transformatively with Hashem. His 7 emotions should be completely transformed and one with Hashem. It's an enormous task. There are people that can do it, and they are called tzaddikim. Those are the righteous individuals who are not only they can control their thoughts and their garments, they can even control their inner workings, their underlying emotions. It's fully in line and sync with God. But for the average Joe, it's not so simple. So the Torah says, we remove that we don't expect from you today. But we do expect to count the days. In other words, you can choose how that underlying emotion can manifest itself in your actual life, in day-to-day life. You can decide that. That's full. You have the steering wheel. I may not be able to tell you that no negative feelings and no negative temptations will ever enter you. You are stuck with them, perhaps. You have underlying skeletons, who knows what. You have emotions that are not the way they should, they're misplaced and so on. But you have temptations to the wrong things, whatever you have to. But how you actually manifest them, the thought, how it translates into thoughts, into words and into actions, that's completely up to you. For that, you have to count. Now, it's not easy. It's not easy to behave properly either all the time. So it's a mitzvah. You have to work on it every single day. Another one, you have to go to Gvura Sheba Gvura, Gvura Sheba Chesed, Chesed Sheba Netzach, Netzach Sheba Yisod. You have to go through the 49 workings. But those are the days. Now, the rabbis also wanted us not to forget how things were in the biblical times. So they said, count the weeks as well. If not biblically, at least we're going to expect that from you on the rabbinic level. In other words, the rabbis want us to have somewhat of a remembrance that this thing is also something we should aspire to. Although we may not achieve it 100%, but work on it too. Count the weeks. Get into that too. Try to transform. Go to that seminar. I don't know if you have to go to that seminar because to be careful with these things. Some of them are charlatans, some of them are ignorant. But then there are real people. There are people that are worthy of your time. And you can learn a lot from them. And you can experience sometimes a moment where you feel like, oh, I think I've found that, I've experienced an epiphany. I transformed myself. 2 weeks later, you may find that it didn't really happen that way. But at least on the rabbinic level, the Torah is telling us, try that too. Don't give up on it wholesale. The biblical level, the Bible, the Torah itself doesn't demand that today so much, because we are a little far from Hashem, and this concealment in the world. The temple is not in existence anymore right now. But the rabbis say, don't give up on it completely. Remember how things were. Eat afikomen, right? Because we want to remember the Paschal offering. Count the weeks. You want to also remember that there's an underlying emotion that needs correction, needs transformation. Sfirat ha-Omer, to count, to shine. Let your emotions shine. Let your thoughts shine. Bring clarity, bring revelation to your thoughts. Bring a godliness to your thoughts. Bring a godliness, a holiness to your speech, to your words, to your actions. Those things are fully in your control. And make no mistake about it. Unmute yourself and ask any question you feel like. So that's the story. Mojish. The problem is nechochish. We don't want to. So we should develop a desire and a commitment that if you really want to experience personal freedom, cherut atzmit, which means personal freedom, you have to tackle your emotions and your weeks and your days. The way emotions work to begin with, and the way they manifest themselves in your mind and in your mouth and in your actions. What is real freedom? Let me tell you one last final thought before I say goodnight. Everything has its needs. A tree. When can you consider a tree free? If you cut the tree down, it's no longer free. It's not free. It can't grow. If it doesn't have the ability to spread its roots, to spread its what do you call it? Its branches. Imagine you tied up the tree with rope and you don't let the branches grow. That's not a tree that tree lacks freedom. It lacks its inner expression. I am giving human terms to a tree. But a tree, if a tree can't walk around, it's not going to feel that it's not free, because it doesn't have that need to begin with. It doesn't have such a need. What's the freedom of an animal? Imagine you put an animal and you tied it to the ground like a tree. It's the ultimate exile for an animal. An animal is defined by the fact that it can roam freely. It can move. It's mobile. It can move around. It can run. It can jump. It can do what it has to do as an animal. Does an animal feel constricted that it can't speak? No, a tree doesn't feel constricted that it can't walk, and an animal doesn't feel constricted that it can't speak. It has no such need, and it never feels tied that it, oh my goodness, I can't say hello to the other dog. If it can't bark, then it's a problem. But if it can't speak, it's not a problem. It never feels constricted that way. A human being, imagine you took a human being and you let it roam freely, no problem. It can walk around, run around, jump around, but you put a zipper on its mouth. You tied it from the top lip to the bottom lip, and it can't speak. It's the ultimate exile. It's the ultimate constriction. It's the ultimate Egypt. Or you took away the ability from a dog, from a human being, to think rationally. What a tragedy that is. But a dog doesn't feel the need to think rationally, to add up 2 and 2. Today is 12, which is a week and 5 days. He doesn't have that ability, and he doesn't feel constricted that it doesn't have that ability. It doesn't look for it. It doesn't need it. A human being needs it. What defines a human being? The ability to think rationally and the ability to communicate. Now we go to the Jew. What's the freedom of a Jew? If you take a Jew and he never puts on tefillin, it's like a human being that never talks. It's the ultimate constriction for his neshama. A neshama has deep needs. We have a Jewish neshama. That neshama has big needs. It doesn't have to be an angel. A neshama is not looking to be an angel, and he's not constricted by the fact that it can't be an angel. But it would feel terribly constricted and in exile if it doesn't have tefillin, and if it doesn't learn Torah, and if it doesn't know what Shabbos is, and doesn't do Shabbos, and it doesn't do whatever other mitzvahs. The mitzvahs are what define the neshama's needs. And just like a tree would be terribly tragic, it would be tragic if you tied up the tree and it can't spread its roots and its branches. It would be terribly tragic if you nailed a dog to the ground, and it would be terribly tragic if you closed a person's mouth and it took away his brain, his ability to think rationally. It is tragic beyond tragic when you take away a Jew from tefillin, when you take away a Jew from learning Torah. It's the ultimate exile for a Jew. So how do we now go out of Egypt on Pesach? The first step is God pulls us out. The second step is we start counting days and weeks. Because as long as our neshamas, the emotions of our neshamas and of our souls are not aligned properly with God, and our thought, speech, and action, the days, the manifestation of those, then we're not free. So the Torah says there's a limit to what you can do biblically. We are in exile. So we, as long as we're in exile, we're in exile. So we can't change maybe the underlying emotion. But when it comes to our behavior and the way we think and talk, over there we have absolute freedom and the ability to choose how to manifest all that. And that's the counting of the days. And the rabbis tell us that today you should also count weeks. Don't just count days, because you always have to remember that maybe you're from those select few that can manage to work over an emotion, to totally transform it. Maybe if you can't do all 7, but maybe one you could. And don't give up. So the Torah says that when the Torah is the biblical mitzvah, talks to all peoples equally. And it tells us what's expected on the simple level. Okay, so today we're in exile. It's a little harder. The rabbis give us a little more of a push to say, remember what was in temple times. Count weeks, not just days. And when you do that, that's when you really left Egypt. And then you can come to the 50th day, when God gives it the Torah, and we forge a bond with Him once again for the 3,332nd time in 5.5 weeks. When God will speak to us again at Mount Sinai, or in our synagogues, or if we, God forbid, we should still be in our homes, or wherever we are. Wherever we are, the 10 Commandments will be said again, and God will ask us, do you want the Torah? And we will say, Nasa v'nishma, we want it, and we are looking forward to this relationship. And that's the ultimate freedom for a Jew. So every creation has its freedom. A stone is, of the freedom of a stone is to be left alone, to be a stone. Don't grind it up and chop it up and destroy it. And we have a mitzvah in the Torah, Bal Tashchit, don't destroy things for no reason. A tree has its freedom. Let it grow. It doesn't need to walk around. Let it grow. That's the ultimate free tree. An animal, let it roam. A human, let it speak and think. And a Jew, Torah and mitzvahs. So my friends, Sfartam Lachem, bring liberty and bring light. Shine up your thought, speech, and action, your garments, and the manifestation of your emotions, and count the weeks as well. Try at least to get into some underlying issues and become a new person and transform parts of yourself. And then the receiving of the Torah will be on a whole different level, and will really have accomplished Yetziat Mitzrayim completely the way it should be. And with that I say, have a wonderful night and a wonderful rest of the week. We will give another class. We will give another.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very, very welcome. We will be giving another class on Thursday night, God willing, the same time, same link. So tune in for some more. I'm going to be doing this now weekly till we can gather once again in person in our shul, in our community centers, and so on and so forth. Thank you all for watching over here on Zoom, and thank you all on Facebook for watching, and all the best to everyone. Good night. Yasher koach. You got my email? I sent you back an email.
Yes, Rabbi, I did. Thank you for your time and the message. Yes, I did.
You can drop off you can drop off this anytime.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good night. Thank you so much for watching.
Good night. Good night. Good night.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Mauricio, I'm going to answer you on your questions today.
Yeah?
I will answer you. I didn't get to it because it's...
Okay.
Yeah. Take care. Chaim, ma shlomcha?
Have a good night.
Good night.
Hey, Jeff. Wake up.
Yashar koach. Who's that?
Hey, Benny. It's your beard.
Where's Benny? I don't see him.
Right there.
Ben.
Oh, here you are, Ben. Okay.
Ben.
Yeah.
Well, Benny for the friends.
You were here the whole time?
Yeah. On the dark.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good day, everyone on Facebook. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Oh, wow. A lot of people watch.
Yeah.
Hilda, how are you? I see you over there. It's nice to see you. All the best. Okay. Good night, everyone.